Hey everybody, welcome back to Sip and Talk. I'm Joe. And as always, I'm ready to dive into some seriously juicy info with you all today. It's like we're mixing up a knowledge cocktail here. Strong stuff, but oh, so smooth going down.
And I'm Sunny, your friendly neighborhood fact checker. I'll make sure we get all the ingredients right. Speaking of mixing things up, you know it's always a good blend? Travel whiskey and discovering awesome new things. You have to check out our friend Micky's YouTube channel, Mickytolife.
Yeah, Mickey's the best. He's always got something cool going on. All right, buckle up, you. We're diving straight into something that's really got everyone talking.
Yeah, what's that?
This whole thing with China saying they're ready to fight the U.S. to the end at all costs. I mean, it sounds like the gloves are officially off, right?
That phrase definitely catches your attention. At all costs.
Totally. We've been swimming through like a sea of information for this one news report's popping up constantly. Some really strong expert opinions flying around and, even official statements that just make you kind of raise an eyebrow.
What's fascinating here right from the start is just how firm that declaration sounds. It's not just a casual comment. It feels like a very deliberate escalation in these ongoing tensions.
Exactly. So our mission for this deep dive, which hey, you're already on since you're listening, is to really understand what's behind this kind of talk. What are the different viewpoints pushing this? What could the consequences actually be down the line? And what does this all mean for how the world operates? Feels like a big moment.
It really does. And it brings up a crucial question right away. When we hear fight to the end at all costs, is that a completely unwavering stance? Or could there be, elements of strategic messaging mixed in there too? We got to look at where these really strong statements are coming from.
Okay, good point. Let's start with a voice we've been seeing a lot, Yao Zhikai. He seems to be a pretty prominent figure representing China's view. What's his take on this whole trade war situation and this idea of fighting to the end?
So Gao Zhikai's main point, and he makes it pretty directly, is that China simply isn't afraid of the United States. He goes way back, talking about China's 5,000-year history. 5,000
years, yeah.
Right. Pointing out that for the vast, vast majority of that time, the U.S. wasn't even on the scene. So this idea that China somehow needs the U.S. to survive or prosper, it just doesn't hold water for him. It's like, imagine your super successful friend who built their business from scratch being told they can't make it without a loan from someone who just showed up yesterday.
5,000 years. Yeah, that definitely puts things in perspective, doesn't it? It's like saying, look, we've been around the block a few times. We know how this works.
Precisely. And he even brings up the Korean War as a direct comparison. He reminds everyone that China, stood its ground against the U.S. for 3 years back then. And in his view, they came out victorious.
Victorious is a strong word for that outcome.
Well, that's his framing. So facing challenges from the U.S. today, it's nothing new, he argues, and it certainly won't scare China into backing down. It's that we've done this before argument, but, stretched over a really long historical timeline.
The Korean War, yeah, that's definitely a significant historical reference point. So he's essentially saying, we weren't intimidated then, and we sure aren't going to be intimidated now.
That's the clear message he's sending. He also stresses that China has tried to negotiate in the past, attempted to find mutually agreeable solutions.
Right.
But according to him, those efforts didn't really lead anywhere fruitful. And now China has reached a point where it's just not willing to make any more concessions. The time for giving ground is over. It's like when you've tried to compromise with someone multiple times and finally just say, okay, that's it. This is my final offer.
Sounds like a pretty firm line in the sand.
Absolutely. He even uses this really strong analogy describing U.S. actions as a kind of protection fee.
Ooh, protection fee.
Yeah.
Like the mob.
Kinda, yeah. His argument is that resisting these demands, even if it involves pain and sacrifice, is ultimately a better strategy than just, surrendering to them. It's the classic pay now or pay later scenario where he believes the long-term cost of surrender is just much, much higher. Imagine a small business owner constantly giving in to unreasonable demands from a bigger competitor. Eventually, they'll just be squeezed out of existence.
That's a really clear way to frame it, actually. So he's not just being tough talk. He actually sounds kind of optimistic about China's ability to withstand all this.
Exactly. His optimism seems to come from what he perceives as, significant mistakes on the part of the United States. He believes the U.S. has been alienating its allies, pursuing inconsistent policies without a clear direction, lacking a coherent long-term plan.
Okay.
He even points to some discussions about the U.S. potentially annexing allies as further evidence of sort of erratic behavior.
Oh, hang on. Annexing allies, that's not something you hear every day. Sounds a bit unorthodox.
To say the least. So bring this back to the at all costs idea. Gao Zhikai's perspective suggests this deep conviction that the costs of resisting the U.S., no matter how high they might seem, are still less damaging than the cost of just giving in. He seems to see a potential weakness, maybe, or a window of opportunity opening up because of these perceived U.S. missteps.
Okay, so that's one pretty strong viewpoint. Now let's switch gears a bit and talk about Mao Ning. She's the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson, right? What was the whole deal with that Mao Zedong video she posted?
Right. So Mao Ning shared this short video clip on X, what used to be Twitter, featuring a speech by Mao Zedong from the Korean War era.
Okay.
And the really striking line from that speech is, fight as long as they want until complete victory. I mean, it's a very powerful, very resolute statement.
Wow, talk about a throwback. That's pulling out some serious historical firepower. It's like your grandpa quoting Patton before, like a really tough board meeting or something.
It is. And the text she included with the video was just as direct. We are Chinese. We are not afraid of provocations. We will not back down.
Oof.
The underlying message is pretty unmistakable, right? They're drawing this direct parallel between the Korean War, a conflict where China directly confronted the U.S. in the current tensions, signaling the same level of defiance, a readiness for a potentially long struggle. It's a clear attempt to project strength and unwavering resolve.
So it's basically like saying, we faced you down before, and guess what? We're prepared to do it again.
That's definitely the image they're trying to project. However, this move didn't exactly go unnoticed or unchallenged. A writer from Hong Kong, Feng Zixian, offered a historical analysis specifically looking at Mao's claim of complete victory in Korea.
Ah, okay. And what did he have to say? I'm guessing his analysis offered maybe a little more nuance than just a straightforward victory narrative.
Exactly. Feng Zixian points out that Mao's declaration of complete victory never actually happened. The Korean War ended in an armistice, a ceasefire reached through negotiation. Not a decisive victory for either side. It was more like a bloody stalemate.
Right, like claiming you won a board game when really you just agreed to stop playing because everyone was exhausted and arguing.
Pretty much. The less talked about details of history, right?
Yeah.
It's never quite as black and white as a short, powerful quote might suggest.
Never is.
Precisely. And Feng goes on to argue that the Korean War actually led to a significant period of isolation for China from the Western world for about 2 decades.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Furthermore, it prompted the United States to substantially increase its support for Taiwan, which was likely not part of Mao's original strategic plan. It's a good reminder that actions can have these, unintended and long-lasting repercussions.
Ouch. So maybe not the totally triumphant example they were hoping to highlight, more like a situation with some pretty significant downsides.
That's Feng's interpretation, yeah. He then raises a pretty pointed question, essentially asking whether Mao Ning fully understands this historical context, the actual outcomes of the Korean War. Like, is she aware of the full picture, or is she selectively using a powerful quote just for its symbolic and propaganda value without considering the broader historical lessons?
That's a sharp critique. Really highlights the importance of understanding the full historical context, not just the catchy sound bites. Okay, so China is definitely talking tough, using history to back it up. But let's flip the coin. Are China's concerns and actions entirely unfounded? What's the perspective from, the United States?
Well, the U.S. perspective is rooted in a number of, let's say, long-standing grievances and concerns. You've got substantial trade imbalances, right? The U.S. imports way more from China than it exports.
Yeah, that's been a thing for ages.
And the ongoing issue of intellectual property theft. The U.S. Trade Representative estimates that American businesses lose anywhere from, get this, $225 billion to a staggering $600 billion annually due to IP theft. And a lot of that is attributed to China. That's like having a huge leak in your national economic boat.
Whoa. That's an enormous amount of lost revenue, lost innovation. It's like someone constantly stealing your best ideas and selling them as their own. seriously.
Exactly. And there's also increasing concern here in the U.S. about the various restrictions American companies face when trying to access the Chinese market. It creates this uneven playing field.
Right, market access. That's another big one.
And of course, there's growing unease about China's rapid advancements, its increasing dominance in crucial technologies like semiconductors, electric vehicles, which is seen by some as a potential threat to U.S. economic competitiveness, even national security.
And the U.S. hasn't just been sitting on its hands while all this is happening, right?
Mm.
We've seen some pretty significant policy responses.
Correct. The U.S. has implemented increasing tariffs on a really wide range of Chinese goods. Recent reports suggest these tariffs now average around 145% on certain products.
145%. Wow.
Yeah. It's a direct economic tool, right? Aimed at reducing imports from China and pressuring Beijing to, alter its trade practices, address these U.S. concerns. It's like putting a super high tax on something to make it way less attractive to buy.
Ouch, those are some hefty tariffs. That's definitely going to impact the cost of a lot of goods. I even remember seeing some report about how the price of certain electronics just jumped significantly after these tariffs kicked in.
And as consumers and businesses here have definitely experienced, while the intended target might be China, the economic burden often gets passed right on to American consumers and companies that rely on those imports. There was even this video we looked at where a small business owner was explaining exactly how these tariffs directly increase their costs and force them to raise prices.
Right, yeah. It's not a simple case of one country just absorbing the cost.
Mm-hmm.
It creates ripples through the whole economy. Now, what's really interesting is looking at what the American public actually thinks about all this.
Absolutely. Recent public opinion polls give us a really revealing snapshot of American attitudes towards China. A Harvard Cap Harris poll from January this year found that a majority, 52%, of Americans actually support these new tariffs on Chinese goods.
Okay, so over half support them.
But, and this is key, there's a significant partisan split. A much higher percentage of Republicans, 74%, support them compared to Democrats, only 34%, which just shows how politically charged this whole issue has become.
Yeah, it's not surprising, really, given the current political landscape.
Mm-hmm.
Seems like almost every issue has that strong partisan divide these days.
Indeed. Furthermore, a Chicago Council poll from last October indicated that a majority, 55% of Americans favor limiting China's rise as a global power, but they want to avoid military conflict.
Okay.
So that suggests a kind of desire to push back against China's growing influence, but without triggering a potentially catastrophic military fight. It's like a competitive coexistence approach in the public mind, maybe.
So the public wants to be tough on China, but also really wants to avoid a full-blown crisis.
Yeah, that's a tricky balance to strike, isn't it?
It is. However, the overall negative views of China are really widespread. A Pew Research poll from May 2024 showed that a staggering 80% of Americans hold negative views of China.
80%, that's huge.
It is. And maybe most alarmingly, 42% now consider China an enemy. That's a significant jump in negative sentiment in just a few years. It really highlights how much the relationship has deteriorated in the eyes of the American public. It really underscores how much trust and, I guess, goodwill has just eroded.
It does. And we even saw a tangible economic reaction here at home that reflects this anxiety. An AP News report from around that time noted the Dow Jones fell by a substantial 2,200 points right after China announced retaliatory tariffs.
Wow, 2,200 points.
Yeah, that immediate market reaction just illustrates the deep economic interconnectedness and the potential for significant financial fallout from these escalating tensions.
So a lot of worry on multiple fronts here in the U.S. Okay, now let's talk about this world order disruptor label that gets thrown around quite a bit when discussing China. What are the arguments behind that accusation?
Well, the arguments for labeling China a world order disruptor often point to several key initiatives and actions. One really prominent example is the Belt and Road Initiative.
Ah, yes, Belt and Road.
This massive infrastructure development investment project. The World Bank estimated it involved over $1 trillion in investments across more than 140 countries by 2023. It's seen by some as China basically attempting to establish its own sphere of influence, potentially undermining the existing Western-led global order. It's kind of like building your own massive network of highways and trade routes that just bypass the traditional ones.
A new Silk Road, but like on steroids, aiming to connect China with the rest of the world in a huge way.
Precisely. The creation of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the AIIB, is also viewed through the same lens. As a multilateral development bank, it's seen as a potential competitor to established institutions like the World Bank and the IMF,
Right.
possibly weakening their influence in global finance and development.
So another significant player emerging on the global financial stage.
Then there are China's actions and claims in the South China Sea. Those have been widely criticized for being inconsistent with, even violating, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea and CLOS, particularly after that international tribunal ruling back in 2016 that rejected many of China's claims. This is seen as a direct challenge to the established international legal framework for maritime territories and navigation.
Yeah, that's a really sensitive and highly contested region. So many overlapping claims there.
Absolutely. And finally, China's consistently increasing military spending reached an estimated $296 billion in 2023. According to Sip&Talk, that's viewed by many as another indicator of its growing ambition to reshape the global balance of power, potentially challenge U.S. military dominance.
Okay, so a combination of economic, financial, territorial, and military actions that are definitely raising concerns. But is that the complete picture? Are there counter-arguments to this whole disruptor label?
Yes, definitely counter-arguments. Proponents of China's role often highlight its significant contribution to global GDP growth. I mean, accounting for something like 32% of global growth in 2023, according to the IMF.
Wow, 32%.
That's seen as a vital engine for the world economy, particularly for developing nations. It's like saying, okay, even if they're doing things differently, they're still helping the overall economic pie get bigger.
Yeah, you really can't ignore those growth figures. A strong global economy does benefit pretty much everyone eventually.
Furthermore, China is a significant participant in UN peacekeeping operations. They deployed around 12,000 personnel in 2023. That actually makes them one of the largest contributors to UN peacekeeping efforts, which suggests, a commitment to international stability, at least in certain contexts.
That's a side of the story that doesn't always get as much attention, I guess.
And finally, China often frames its actions, things like its military exercises, its stance on Taiwan, as a direct response to what it perceives as U.S. containment policies, like the U.S. providing arms and support to Taiwan. So the containment argument.
Right. From their perspective, they are reacting to external pressure, defending their core interests, rather than just unilaterally trying to overturn the existing world order. It's really a matter of perspective, isn't it? One side's disruption is the other side's self-defense.
So it really comes down to how you interpret the same set of actions. One side sees a proactive challenge, the other sees a reactive defense. Okay, now let's dive into some of these specific provocative behaviors that have been reported. Where are we seeing these tensions manifest themselves most concretely?
Yeah, we're seeing these tensions play out across multiple domains, starting with military activities. The situation around Taiwan is obviously particularly sensitive. In April 2025, China conducted these really significant military exercises in the Taiwan Strait.
Right, I remember hearing about those.
Involved a substantial number of warships, including their aircraft carrier SoundOn, plus fighter jets, rocket forces. These exercises actually simulated a blockade of Taiwan. That's a very clear demonstration of potential intentions. Simulating a blockade. Pretty assertive move.
It is. And the frequency of these exercises has reportedly increased compared to 2024, according to Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense. These actions are often seen as a direct response to statements or actions by Taiwan's leadership and also to Taiwan's own efforts to counter espionage. It's this cycle of action and reaction.
So a very visible flexing of military muscle in response to political developments. What about the South China Sea? That's another area with just a long history of disputes.
Tensions remain consistently high there. There have been increasing instances of confrontations between Chinese Coast Guard vessels and ships from the Philippines in contested areas.
Yeah, seem to be more clashes lately.
Reports indicate a rise in those incidents, from 12 in 2023 to 15 in 2024, according to CSIS data. We've also seen reports of Chinese vessels actively blocking Philippine ships trying to resupply their outposts in the Spratly Islands. That significantly raises the stakes, the risk of escalation.
Physically blocking resupply ships?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty direct and confrontational tactic.
Exactly. China has also increased its patrols and presence near the Senkaku Diaoyu Islands, which Japan claims. The Japan Coast Guard reported a record 333 days of Chinese patrols in that area in 2024.
333 days. That's almost constant presence.
Pretty much. Additionally, Vietnam's Ministry of Foreign Affairs has reported numerous incursions by Chinese vessels into Vietnam's exclusive economic zone. So it really paints this picture of increasing assertiveness across the entire maritime region.
It sounds like China is actively and consistently pushing its territorial claims in all these surrounding waters. What about on land borders? Any significant issues there recently?
The border region between India and China has seen some smaller-scale clashes in the Ladakh area in both 2023 and 2024, according to reports from India's MOD. While these haven't really escalated into major conflicts, they do represent ongoing friction along that shared border. It's like two neighbors occasionally having minor disputes over the fence line, but, with armies involved.
Yeah, even small border skirmishes can be a source of pretty significant tension between two huge countries like that.
Absolutely. And we've also observed China's military activities extending to areas near South Korea and Japan. Reports of Chinese military aircraft entering South Korea's Air Defense Identification Zone, the KEDIZ, about 15 times in 2024. Similarly, Japan's MOD reported Chinese warships approaching Japan's EZ around 20 times that same year. These actions, while not necessarily aggressive incursions like crossing into territorial waters, are often seen as probing, a demonstration of their expanding military reach.
So a really wide geographical area where these military tensions are playing out. Okay, shifting away from direct military actions for a second, what about the issue of espionage? That's another area of pretty significant concern, right?
Indeed. Taiwan has been a major focus when it comes to alleged Chinese espionage. There have been reports of arrests of Taiwanese military personnel for supposedly leaking classified info to China.
Like what kind of info?
Including sensitive details about security arrangements for Taiwan's president. Prosecutions for Chinese espionage in Taiwan have also reportedly increased. And disturbingly, there were even reports of Taiwanese soldiers being pressured, maybe coerced, into filming videos where they pledged to surrender if a conflict broke out.
Whoa, surrender promise videos. That's a pretty unsettling tactic. Sounds like psychological warfare almost.
It does, and it really highlights the multifaceted nature of these tensions. On a global scale, there have been widespread accusations of Chinese espionage targeting various sectors and nations. A joint intelligence report from 6 countries, the UK, US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Germany, accused China of conducting widespread surveillance through malicious software hidden in various apps.
Like Five Eyes plus Germany.
Yeah. Cybersecurity firms have also estimated a very large number of cyber attacks in 2024 originated from China, targeting government agencies, businesses, critical infrastructure. It feels like this constant digital tug of war.
Yeah, it seems like hardly a week goes by without some new report of a significant cyber intrusion being linked back to China. It's relentless.
It's a persistent and constantly evolving threat. We've also seen specific instances like an arrest in South Korea of someone accused of bribing South Korean soldiers for sensitive info, and numerous indictments here in the U.S. against individuals and groups allegedly involved in cyber attacks on behalf of the Chinese government. It just underscores the global reach and persistent nature of these alleged espionage efforts.
So a really broad and active alleged espionage campaign. And finally, let's touch on the issue of technology theft. That's a key element in the economic friction, especially between the U.S. and China.
The accusations here are quite significant. The UK recently accused China of directly copying the designs of its military drones for use in China's own domestically produced versions.
Copying drone designs, wow.
Yeah. A UK intelligence report also highlighted a substantial number of cases involving the theft of aviation-related tech just over the past year. That's a clear example of IP infringement in a very sensitive industry.
It's like industrial espionage on a national scale, with potentially serious implications for defense and security, not just economics.
That's the concern, exactly. As we discussed earlier, the U.S. estimates its losses from IP theft by China in the hundreds of billions of dollars annually, hitting a huge range of industries. And it's not just the U.S. Germany's Federal Intelligence Agency has also publicly accused China of stealing advanced tech related to auto manufacturing. So it highlights that this isn't just a U.S. problem, it's a widespread issue affecting multiple Western economies.
It definitely sounds like a major point of contention and a huge source of friction across several big economies. Okay, so we've looked at the rhetoric, the history, the U.S. view, this whole range of reported provocative behaviors. What are the tangible impacts of all this, particularly thinking about China's global product influx?
Well, the global trade landscape is potentially on the verge of a really significant transformation. The increased U.S. tariffs, now reportedly around 145% on many Chinese goods, could lead to a substantial decrease in China's exports to the U.S., possibly by as much as $500 billion.
$500 billion. That's massive.
It is, and that would likely compel China to aggressively seek out and expand its export markets elsewhere. It's like a major shipping company having one of its biggest ports suddenly impose huge fees it needs to find new routes fast.
And where are they most likely to focus those efforts? Where are the new routes?
The European Union and the ASEAN countries look like key targets. In 2024, China's exports to the EU were already around $380 billion, and analysts expect further growth, maybe 10%. Exports to the ASEAN nations were near $370 billion in 2024, with an even bigger projected increase, maybe 15%. So this clearly indicates a strategic pivot towards these other major economic blocs.
That makes sense. If one huge market gets harder to access because of tariffs, you look for opportunities in other large markets. But how are these new target markets reacting? Are they just rolling out the welcome mat for this increased influx of Chinese goods?
Not entirely. The European Union in particular is starting to show signs of resistance. There's been this notable surge in Chinese electric vehicle exports to the EU, up about 25% in 2024.
Yeah, I've seen a lot more Chinese EVs around.
Right. And this rapid growth has triggered anti-subsidy investigations by the European Commission. There's a real possibility of increased tariffs being imposed on Chinese EVs there too, potentially up to 30%. So the welcome mat in these new markets might not stay out indefinitely, especially if their own domestic industries feel threatened.
Okay. So it sounds like the EU is worried about being overwhelmed by potentially heavily subsidized Chinese products, which could undercut their own manufacturers.
Yeah.
Similar concerns to the U.S., maybe?
Precisely. And the broader global trade implications of these escalating U.S.-China tensions could be quite substantial. The IMF has projected a potential decrease of around 0.5% in overall global trade, just as a direct consequence.
0.5% doesn't sound like much, but for global trade.
It translates to a staggering $1.2 trillion. And this would disproportionately affect countries that are heavily reliant on Chinese-made goods, particularly in regions like Africa and Latin America. It's a powerful reminder that even nations not directly involved in the U.S.-China conflict could feel significant economic repercussions.
So it really is a truly interconnected global economy.
Yeah.
Disruptions in one major area can and do have ripple effects pretty much everywhere.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, Hugh, we've covered a huge amount of ground in this deep dive. What would you say are the most crucial takeaways for someone listening to all this?
Well, I think the key takeaways really seem to be China's increasingly strong, assertive rhetoric, which often leans on these historical narratives to project an image of just unwavering resolve. We're seeing a wide range of global reactions to China's multifaceted actions, everything from big shifts in public opinion here in the U.S. to the potential for new trade barriers popping up in Europe. And the economic consequences of these ongoing tensions are potentially massive. You know, with a significant reshaping of global trade patterns already underway, it's this really complex interplay of political signaling, hard economic realities, and differing historical perspectives.
It definitely feels like we're at a really critical inflection point in global affairs. So to leave you, our insightful listener, with something to really chew on, considering that long sweep of history Gao Zikai emphasized and the deeply intertwined nature of our global economy today, what does fighting to the end truly look like in this context? It's clearly not just about tariffs or military posturing anymore, is it? What are the unintended, unforeseen consequences that could ripple out for all nations involved in this really high-stakes global dynamic?
That's the fundamental question, isn't it? It forces us to look beyond the immediate headlines, the day-to-day squabbles, and consider the long-term systemic implications of what could be a fundamental shift in the relationship between the world's two largest economies. The ramifications could be incredibly far-reaching, touching on virtually every aspect of international relations and global commerce.
Absolutely. Plenty to ponder there. And hey, speaking of staying informed and diving deep, if you're looking for more engaging content, you should definitely check out our friend Micky's YouTube channel, Mickytolife.
Oh yeah, Mickey stuff is great.
He's doing some fantastic work over there exploring all sorts of interesting topics. You definitely won't want to miss what he's got cooking, so go check it out, hit subscribe.